So, Iboy Lahu. So we're going to ask a question. So in yesterday's daf, we were introduced to the idea that we don't want to leave two blank lines between the end of the writing and where the witnesses are going to sign, because there's a possibility that somebody's going to write some extra text in there, and that is going to, we're going to invalidate a contract that has that potential in order to prevent people from writing contracts such that they can then manipulate them later. Okay, so now the question is like this. Iboy Lahu. The question is, Shnei Shitin Shamru. We had discussed yesterday, what about 1.5 lines? We decided anything less than 2 lines. Now he said it's 2 lines. Hein ve'aviron o dilma hein velo aviron. Are we talking about 2 lines that can fit 2 lines of text? Or what about 2 lines, and what about the airspace in between? You got to leave some space in between the lines. You can't touch the letters. So the question is 2 lines that you have to worry about. Do you have to leave standard line space with the little extra couple of points in between? Was it 12-point font with 2 point in between or something like that? Or do you not worry about that? Says the Rashbam, he says that how are you going to write if you're not going to leave the airspace? He says you'd have to write a smaller font. You'd have to try to write smaller. Now the thing is that if you write smaller, that's a little bit recognizable. So the question is that going to make it so that people are a little bit more aware that this is a forged contract? Summer of Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, "Nistabra dehein va'aviron." It makes sense that in order for it to be an invalidated shtar, it should be the lines with the airspace that you need in order to be able to write neatly. Because if it was going to be 2 lines without any extra space, shita achas below avira l'maychazya. What would a line with no space? What would it be? What would you be able to use that for? Right? It wouldn't be usable for any purpose. So Shema Mino. So that's how you can learn. In order to be able to have a problem where you're going to write words in, you need to have 2 lines with the appropriate space in between the lines so that you can write neatly. And this is where the Rashba says you could write smaller. You could write it smaller, but that in itself would look very suspicious. And since you'd be writing a smaller font, you'd be looking very suspicious, so people would notice that as well. We're also going to note that later on in the Gemara, we're going to point out that people who were scribes were very skilled and had good handwriting, and their lettering was small and neat. People who were not scribes would write larger, generally speaking, than those who were scribes. So writing smaller than normal would be out of the ordinary. We'll see if writing larger than normal might not necessarily be as out of the ordinary. Rav Shifti Amar Mishmei de Chizkiah. Rav Shifti said in the name of Chizkiah, Shnei Shitin She'amru B'chsav Yedei Edim V'lo Ksav Yedei Sofer. It says the 2 lines that we're talking about has to be that they're lines that would be written by a regular person, not the lines that would be written by a sofer. Again, as we said, a sofer's handwriting is smaller, so therefore he's actually saying you need the lines, the 2 lines, to actually be a little bit larger. But we're not going to. Well, you don't need crowns on top neget or in a shtar, right? It's not written in the same way as Sefer Torah. I think I'm going to double check that. I'm not 100% sure. I've only been a witness on Gittin one time. It was a weird sort of situation. I was in Vancouver, and they did a basin, and they brought an expert in Gittin in for the day, and he just did 5 or 6 Gittin in one day, and we brought 2 witnesses, and we sat there and just signed documents. And they, when you do a get, you have to write it right there because the husband has to say write the get. So you have to write it. It's 12 lines, and it's with Safras. I think it is probably written with the crowns because he had to sit and he write it with Safras. I don't know if the crowns were necessary though. I know that we didn't have to write any crowns when we signed our names. We had to sit there for about a half hour practicing writing our names properly because once he finished his contract, when he finished the writing, he didn't want us to write our names and mess the whole thing up. So we had to make sure that we were ready and prepared. So we wrote him samples. And he said, "Okay, this is good enough. Write like this." So it was so long ago. I don't recall the details of exactly how it was.
You just you wrote it in cursive, like your name, like you normally would.
we had to sign our witness names in Safras, in Ksava Shuras, just like we were writing in Torah. So that's why he had to teach us how to write it, right? Not just regular. Like, and when you sign a ksuba, right, you sign with your regular script, regular name. When you sign a get, you sign it with your with like, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe the Gemara will talk about it. But that's just from what I recall, right? Okay, so now, so my timer, why is it that the size of the lines are invalid only if they are larger sized lines, like so that a regular person would be writing it? Because the kol hamazayif lav ligabe safra azil. Because if a person's trying to make a invalid contract, he's not going to go to a sofer. Soferim had reputable businesses. So if I said, hey, I need you to add a couple of lines into this contract, it's already signed by witnesses, the sofer's going to look at you and go, that's not allowed. You can't do that, right? Because if you ruin your reputation, then the Baistins aren't going to use you anymore. So the soferim aren't going to do it. Therefore, who's gonna forge the shtar? It would have to be a regular person, right? Let's say the person who's holding the contract, or one of the witnesses, or somebody like that, would write an extra line into the contract to add something in. So therefore, since that's what you're worried about, the size of the lines have to be a little bit larger because they don't write the same size. We don't write the same size as a sofer.
Like when you're kidding them, you sign a text and they tell you if it like went over the line and validate the whole text. Yeah, back in the day. You fill in the circle perfectly.
That's right. That's correct. Okay. Now, Vikama. So now, how much space do you have to leave in between for there to be two lines? Some of Yitzchak ben Elazar, of Yitzchak ben Elazar says, Kigon licha licha. He says you have to have enough to put the word licha and licha ze al gav ze, one on top of the other. One thing that you'll notice about the word licha, when you write it, there's a part of the lamed that sticks up higher and a part of the chaf sofist that goes lower. If I don't leave enough line, then the lamed underneath it is going to bump into it. So what I have to make sure is that this licha starts low enough. So really, I need to leave quite a bit of space in between so that I have a licha, and then I can write licha underneath without the lamed touching the chaf sofist. Right? They have like a line space that goes above it and a line space that goes below it, because some letters, Hebrew letters, go below the line and some Hebrew letters go above the line. Okay? So that's correct. Alma kasavar shnei shitin ve'arba avirin. That means that what you really need is you need 2 lines of text and 4 air spaces. If you could imagine, if they have, this is like the way that this is almost like a second grade paper where they, you teach your handwriting, kids' handwriting, right? They have like this. So I need to leave. This is an airspace. This is my writing space. Then an airspace, and an airspace, and then a writing space, and then an airspace. Because I need to have one airspace above the line I'm writing on, one airspace below the line I'm writing on. Then the line underneath needs an airspace above and an airspace below. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So therefore, it comes out, you need 2 lines for the writing and 4 airspace lines. Right? 4 space lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's almost like, I remember when they taught you writing, they would make airspace lines.
Yes, right?
They would do that exact thing.
That's correct.
The smaller, lowercase. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what you need to be able to leave. Reb Chia bar Ami mishmei de Ula Amar. Reb Chia bar Ami says in the name of Ula. He says Kigo lamed milmala v'chaf milmata. You don't need to leave extra space. You just need to be able to leave one airspace in between so that you have enough room to draw the chaf further down and the lamed above. Even though they may be going into the same airspace, we're not worried about that. Does that make sense?
Why? Because they could touch.
Oh, they could touch, right? So he says, why? He's going to wind up with 2 written lines and 3 airspaces, right? Airspace, written line. Airspace, which is going to serve as the airspace for the bottom of the first line and the top of the second line, writing, and then the 3rd airspace underneath. So why is that? Why aren't we worried about the 2 touching? The answer is most letters don't rise above the line, and most letters don't go below the line. If on occasion one does go below and one goes above, The sofer just needs to make sure he slides the letter over a little bit so that they don't touch each other. That's all, right? So you can manage to figure that out to avoid the crowding. Rabbi Yovo says Kagon Baruch ben Levi b'shita achas. So he says, for example, you want to be able to write the name Baruch ben Levi on one line, because then the top of the lamed is going to go above, and the foot of the chaf is going to go before. So kasavar shita achas ushne avirin. So he's holding that you need one line and two air spaces, right? That's all you need.
Isn't that technically 3 air spaces?
That's what I was wondering here. I was taking a look and going, isn't that 3 air spaces? So he says, no, it's 2 air spaces. It looks to me like he's holding that it's the case that it would be that you need, for each line, you need 2 spaces. But what does the article there say?
One space above the line
Uh-huh.
of Levi,
Right.
One space below the line for the final stop.
Okay.
This is equivalent to 2 lines with a minimal space between them.
Okay, so all you need is that. He says all you need, I guess, is the little space between. So that's. So he says that he's suggesting, I guess, that the lamed above is not a full space and the chaf below is not a full space. Therefore, you only need half a space above, half a space below, and 1 space in between. So it's the equivalent of 2 lines of writing and 2 lines of in between space. That's what it sounds like the explanation is. Okay,
A portion of it.
That's
not
correct.
Not a full letter would go.
That's what it sounds like to me. Okay, so that's the way we'll understand that. Amarav lo shanu ela bein edim liksav. This problem of having 2 spaces in between the writing and the witnesses is a problem when it's a space between the writing and the witnesses. Aval bein edim la'asharta afilu tuva nami kosher. But if the space is between the witnesses and the certification that Beis Din provides, that's okay. Now, what is the certification that Beis Din provides? We are getting a lot of use out of this paper. So let's presume this is a small version of a shtar, okay? So I write my shtar, right? My lines of shtar. And then I've got aid, and I've got aid, okay? I can't have 2 spaces in between the writing and the witnesses. That we get, right? Then comes along Beis Din, and they write their witnesses down here. It's like a Beis Din certification. And what they're doing is they say, we verified these witnesses. They've been checked. That way now, when I go to collect this contract, I can use it in any Beis Din. Because I might not live in the same area, or the witnesses may die in between, and we might not be able to check them. So getting this certified with the court is going to be very useful. This Gemara is telling us that if there's space in between the witnesses and the certification on the bottom, that's not a problem. It's only a problem if there's space in between the lines and the witnesses.
After that, the problem. If we learned that if we leave enough space, it's a fortune.
Oh, now we're going to go into that in some detail, trying to figure out exactly, right? We're going to try to figure out exactly why that should be. What is the certification? The certification is merely a signature of more witnesses indicating that it's been certified. Well, if you've got space, then you were just pointing out, you can also forge something in this space too. Now, right now, you can answer, well, you'll take a look and you'll see a whole contract above it. Yeah, but now you see it. Now you don't. Now I've got plenty of space to write a new contract. If I've got 2 spaces here, now I've got a brand new contract with some certified witnesses, and I'm in great shape. So therefore, yeah, why is this not a problem? That's what the Gemara wants to know. Okay, so everything's fine. You have to keep in mind that back then, parchment was not so easy to come by, right? Paper was not, right now, paper's not worth the paper it's written on. So back then, paper was very valuable. They would reuse papers, right? If you had a paper that you had, you could reuse it, right? So The fact that we tore off a piece, like I am right here, right? It wouldn't bother them as long as the witnesses were there and all the rules were followed. So, however, if you've got blank spaces, this is very risky because now this tear on the top doesn't indicate anything. It just indicates that I tried to use the piece of paper. Also, you have to recognize that first of all, they probably didn't tear it like this. They probably cut it, made it a nice cut. And also, parchment comes from animals, right? They're not perfectly square shaped. So every parchment piece is cut to size. So probably it was just expected that you'd have pieces cut. Then it's not going to help you, right? If you cut the witnesses off, the witnesses are the best part. That's the part you need to keep, right? That's the part you need to keep. So that's if I'm going to forge something, I want the witnesses. So now let's figure this out. Why is it so? Maishna bein edim liksav. What's the reason why we can't leave a space between the witnesses and the writing of the contract? Because Dilma Mizayif, because of Maidabai, because maybe he'll forge and put whatever he wants. He might even tear the top contract off and write something in underneath. V'chasimi sahadi bein edim ashar. So v'chasimi sahadi, and now you've got signed witnesses there, and so that's what we're trying to avoid. Well, bein edim lashar nami Mizayif. Why can't he also be? Why shouldn't we also be concerned that he'll write something between the witnesses and the certification? Why? Because he's going to rip it off, and then uksav mai deboy, he'll write whatever he wants in that space, v'chasimi sahadi, and he's going to wind up having the signatures of the certification on there. So the answer is because based in demetayitle, based in does this. Right? When they've got a contract, I'm going to have to go back in time, pretend this isn't ripped. Okay? When Basin has a contract like this, they take some ink like that and they rub it in there in order to fill in the space. You won't be able to forge this because even if you tear it off, you're going to be left with this,
Right.
And there's nothing you could do with that, right? Like when you write a check. I don't know if you write checks anymore. When I was a kid, they used to have checks, and when you would write the dollar, right? You put a line all the way across to fill the space so that nobody could forge it and add more, right?
Before and after.
That's correct. Okay, so that's essentially what they do, right? For those that are too young for checks, I'll have to explain it after the year. It's like e-transfer in the old days. So okay. Well, if that's the case, that's why we're not worried about it. Well, if that's the case, so then why don't we simply have a solution for the two space problem, which is why don't you just put a little scribble between the end of the contract and the witnesses too? Right. Problem solved. Why don't you do that? So the answer is Amri Sahadi Atiyusahu Dechasimi. So he says, well, the reason why is if you put your witnesses underneath this little scribble, then you're going to think, what are the witnesses certifying? The witnesses certify whatever is immediately above whatever they sign their names to.
Right.
They are certifying the scribble. What does that mean? How do you certify a scribble? What's a scribble? The answer is the scribble is controversial. How do you know that something wasn't written there and he scribbled over it? The answer is the witnesses signed, indicating that nothing was written underneath it, and that's what the witnesses signed for. Well, then it's going to invalidate the contract. Well, we're going to check to verify the witnesses at some point, right? That's what the Ashart is going to do. So therefore, we can't put a scribble here before the witnesses, because then a Basin taking a look at this contract is going to look at it and say, the witnesses are really certifying the scribble, not the contract, maybe. So we don't want to scribble here on a regular contract. So therefore, the witnesses can't have a space because we can't scribble. But over here, between the witnesses and the certification, there we can scribble, and therefore
no gap between the contract.
Therefore, we can leave a gap. Now the question is, why? Why can we scribble?
No, because you just said it. Because we're between the contract and the AIDM is the information that they're testifying for. Whereas after the signature of the AIDM, you're not writing something else. You're like the the Edom is to testify for what's above.
Correct.
So below that, it's
So how do I know that this signature of the Beis Din isn't to certify this scribble?
Because they're certifying what the Edom above did. They're certifying the Edom.
Yeah, but you don't know that because there's a scribble here. Maybe they're certifying the scribble. The answer is even simpler, right? The answer is because Bein Edom Lashar Nami. So why don't we worry about maybe the witness that scribbling between the witnesses and the certification won't be a problem. Amri, they say Beidina Atiyuta hu dechasimi. Beidina Atiyuta lo chasimi. He says because a Beis Din never would certify a scribble. It's not what a Beis Din does. A witness might, because they're looking at going, I'm going to certify just whatever's written here.
Right.
You wouldn't need a Beis Din signature. You wouldn't need a certification of a Beis Din in order to verify the scribble. So therefore, the fact that there's a scribble here and a signature of Beis Din underneath it, you know that this is really going on with the rest of everything. The witnesses, though, might have only signed in order to verify the scribble. And so therefore, that would be a problem. So we don't, therefore, we have sort of a cascading effect.
Right.
Because we're worried that the witnesses will be certifying the scribble and not the contract, we can't scribble. Since we can't scribble, we can't leave two lines.
Right.
But down here, we're not worried about the Beis Din certifying the scribble. Therefore, we can scribble. And since we can scribble, we don't have to worry about leaving extra lines.
The only thing I don't understand is what, even that scribble, what is it certifying?
That we're going to prevent.
Isn't it certifying the Edom?
The scribble is to certify.
The
No, the scribble is to prevent me from using this as a forged contract.
No, I understand that. I'm saying because you're saying the Beis Din wouldn't certify the scribble, right?
Correct.
But the whole point of the Beis Din is to certify the Edom.
That's right. That's the point.
So the scribble means nothing.
And that's the point. But here, the scribble might not mean nothing, so therefore the witnesses might be certifying that.
Right, because the witnesses, that's what I was saying, the witnesses are certifying the content.
Yes.
He's certifying the Edom. So this one passes.
That's a good way to look at it, right? Okay. It seems from the Rashbam that it was more an issue that Beis Din wouldn't even worry about the scribble at all or something like that. But I think your explanation does also make sense. It's a good perspective on it. So in any event, bottom line is scribbles are acceptable over the Ashrarta. Hence, we don't have to worry about leaving extra space. It's similar to what we said yesterday, where we could have a puzzle person signing in between the lines, right? We had a puzzle person signing in between, filling that space, which prevents somebody from writing any inappropriate material in there. Like the schach we use as an example. Okay, so now the lechush we're on to the you can always catch up, right? The lechush dilma gayas le leela umachik le letiyuta. Okay, well, maybe what he'll do is here's the strategy. Okay, when you have parchment, if you ever seen how it works in the Sefer Torah, the ink sits on top of the parchment. It can crack. If I have a sharp object, a knife or scraper, I can scrape that ink off. That's correct. But you also have an erased parchment. Now, erased parchment is valuable if I'm trying to forge a document. But if you've ever seen a Torah that's got a scratch on it, if you've ever seen a Torah that's been corrected, right? You look inside, it looks like you can see where the correction was, right? It's smudgy, it's darker under that area, and then they wrote on top of it, right? Okay. So that's what an erased parchment looks like. So you have to have that picture in your head. You're looking at an erased parchment. You can tell when you see an erased parchment. Why is it, okay, let's say this. The Beis Din would write this. The Beis Din would scribble, the Beis Din would certify. And now we're not worried that there's going to be a forgery. Great. What's the guy going to do? He'll tear this part off. Now he's got this part, right? Then he goes and grabs a knife and he erases the scribble and then writes a new contract on it.
Not kosher.
It's not kosher, but how are you going to know? You got to look at this thing and know. How is that going to know? So therefore, what he's going to do is Dilma Gayas Leilei. He's going to tear off the top part. He'll erase these scribbly lines. Because of my debate, he'll write whatever he wants in that space, right? Umachtim Sadi. And now the witnesses are signed.
If you think of Beis Din, you tell that.
Oh, what's the Beis Din going to be able to tell?
That it's forged.
They're not going to be able to tell it's forged, but they're going to be able to tell that it was erased.
Exactly.
So the Rav says, Shtar haba hu ve'edav al hamachak kosher. He says, if you've got a contract and the entire document is written on an erased piece of paper, that's kosher. Why? Because all we did was erase whatever contract was on this piece of paper before, and we wrote a new one. So we wrote a contract, and then we signed the bottom. That's kosher. So, well,
they do it with
yes. That's the idea. And if you're going to walk into Beis Din and you're going to have a contract written on an erased parchment, it would be acceptable. So why wouldn't he get away with it? So what he did is he scribbled it out, then he erased the top, and then he wrote a valid contract on top. Beis Din would accept it. What's wrong with the contract? It's written on erased paper, and it's got the original Eidim.
Doesn't that look so suspicious? The entire thing above had been
What?
rewritten, but the Eidim is...
Oh, okay, very good.
No,
At this
the
point,
have to be erased as well.
that's correct.
Everything
right?
has to be erased.
So that's a fine point. The Gemara has not picked up. You're a few lines ahead of us, right? That's right. You can, well, it looks smudged. It doesn't look like you can read what's underneath. You really shouldn't be able to read what's underneath. So now, now, if you're going to take a look and you're going to say, well, this statement that a shtar, which is only erased paper, has erased shtar and erased witnesses. So if that's Shmuel's opinion, then it's fine. Because Rav is the one who would have disagreed. He would say such a shtar is puzzle. Why? Because Rav is the one who says, you don't have to worry about the extra space because you can always scratch it off and fill it in. And you say, oh, but wait a second, if you erase this, the shtar will be kosher. No, it won't. Only Shmuel says the shtar is kosher. Okay, that's a possible answer. At least Rav is consistent. Rav is going to say that you walk into Beis Din with an erased contract. They won't accept it. They're going to go, this is fishy. It's erased. We're not taking this contract. That's what Rav says. Then okay, if that's how you're going to understand it, that's great. But El Rav Tavyumi, what about Rav Tavyumi? Demasni lo mishmei Rav. He learns in the name of Rav. My ikal meimer. He says this is in the name of Rav. Rav, who says that you can scribble you can leave extra lines, you can leave more than 2 lines. Rav, who then says you can scribble, and then Rav says an erased shtar is valid. So how are you going to explain how this is going to be safe? So the answer is kasavar kol ki hai gavna in mekaimin oso mina asharto shabo ela mina edim shabo. He says because what he would say is if you had a contract which had erasure like this, you wouldn't look at this asharta. This asharta is a certification of Beis Din. We wouldn't read this contract and say, oh, this is a valid contract. Look, it's got a certification of Beis Din on it. We would look for the witnesses on it. And since we couldn't get away with the witnesses because they can't leave more than 2 lines, the asharta, you're right, we could get away with it. Where'd my paper go? Right? The asharta, I could get away with it with the lines, with the extra lines in the middle and the smudging, and I'd accept it, right? That I'd accept, even if this asharta was on clean paper and this was on erased paper, I'd accept it, sure, but I never accept an erased contract with an asharta on the bottom. Because why? Specifically because this is a problem. This could happen. They could scrape this off. Does that make sense? Okay. Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo shanu el bein ha'edim l'ksav. This problem of the two lines is only a problem. He agrees with what we just said before, with what Rav said. The problem is only between the witnesses and the writing of al bein ha'edim la'asharta. Afilu shita achas. He says the other way. He says, if you leave any space between the witnesses and the certification, even 1 line, it's not valid. Why? Maishna bein edim la'asharta. What is his perspective? That, not like what Rav is saying, that the erased shtar we wouldn't accept. He says the reverse. Dilmagai is Leroy. I would worry that he might rip off the top because of huva edav b'shita achas, and then he's going to write a 1-line contract. This 1-line contract is going to have 2 witnesses. He's going to have 1 line, 2 invalid witnesses, but he's going to have kosher witnesses underneath from the asharta. So therefore, Beis is not even going to look at these 2 witnesses. They're going to walk in. He's going to walk in the Beis and go, look, I've got my contract Oh, you've got two witnesses. Oh, look, it's already certified by Beis Din. It's great. Okay. Now, Rav doesn't worry about that. Why? Because Rav doesn't hold you can write a one-line contract.
Oh,
No such thing. No such thing as a one-line contract. Rabbi Yochanan says you can write a one-line contract. If you can write a one-line contract, I can't allow any space at all between the Edom and the Sharta. Everything goes according to their own viewpoints.
this comes up in Ksubas, right? Or Ksubas, I know about. You have to have 3 lines. I think it's Ksubas or Kedushin, somewhere else.
In any contract, this should make sense, right? This should be the rules of any contract.
Let's wait another 5 years for that one.
Sorry?
Let's wait another 5 years.
Yeah, you for Ksubas, that's what we do. Because Savar Shtara Bahu Ve'edav B'shit Achas Kosher. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who holds that if I write a contract with one line, with witnesses on that same line, right, just one line, that is a valid contract. No, everybody else was saying that you have to write a contract. They have to put the Edom underneath it. And not only that, but the last line of the contract has to repeat something from the contract before. So nobody else is worried about this. But Rabbi Yochanan says, I guess he was worried that it would be difficult for people to find a sofer who could write a contract. If they're being paid by the word or by the parchment or whatever it is, you can write the cheapest, most simple shtar, writing it, I borrowed $1,000 from so-and-so on such and such a date, and then they sign the two witnesses on the same line, and you're done. Ihachi, well, okay, now we have a problem then. Because Rabbi Yochanan says, he won't even allow you to leave one line space before the Asharta. But then why does he allow you to leave 2 line space, or less than 2 lines, 1 line space before the Eidim? Remember, he said only 2 line space is a problem of a problem because you'll write a contract in. Right. But according to Yochanan, 1 line is sufficient to write a contract. Right. So there, if he's going to leave even 1 line space between the writing and the witnesses, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's going to be a problem also. Because he'll tear off the top because of my deboy, and he's going to write whatever he wants in that 1 line space. And he'll sign 2 false witnesses at the end of that document. And then when he comes to Beis Din and they're going to say, we want to verify the document, he'll verify the other 2 witnesses that are written below. Because remember, we said that once you have a contract, you don't have to verify every witness is on it. You only have to verify 2 of the witnesses on it. So he's got 2 kosher witnesses. So they'll verify those 2 people's signatures. And the other 2, which he just made up and he wrote in, can be a forgery and he can get away with it. So the answer is, Hasavar shtar haba hu b'shita achas, ve'edav b'shita acheres, puzzle. So he says, because he holds that if you have such a contract and you write all the information on 1 line and the witnesses are on 1 line, the witnesses that you've got to certify had better be the witnesses that are on the same line. If the witnesses that you certify are on the next line, that he says you can't do. Right? Because there's this possibility for the forgery. If it's all written on the same line, those 2 witnesses are valid, you can't forge, right? Because you get valid witnesses. But if that 1 line that he slips in, if he's slipping in a fake line, and he slips in 2 fake witnesses there, then he could do that theoretically, because he's got 1 line to do it with. Therefore, we're not going to allow him to certify the contract with those 2 witnesses that are below it. It's got to be the 2 witnesses are on the same line. Okay. So, take that out. I'm a line ahead, right? At this point, Rabbi Yochanan is suggesting that I can write the contract with 1 line, and then I can put witnesses at the end. He doesn't put extra witnesses. He writes it on 1 line, and then he relies on the 2 witnesses underneath as his 2 witnesses. But we say, Rabbi Yochanan, when he says that it has to be a 1 line contract, has to have witnesses on the same line. The witnesses are below it, that's not going to be acceptable, right? In order to prevent as the statement. Now comes what I was saying. Maybe what he'll do is he'll write a forged line and put 2 forged witnesses on that line. The Amar, and he'll say, I put extra witnesses underneath too. So I've got two witnesses on the same line, which makes it valid. And then the 2 witnesses underneath were just extra witnesses, but those are the ones I'm going to come and certify. So the answer is, you don't have to worry about that either, because kol ki hai gavna ein mekaymin oso mina edim shilamata el mina edim shilamala. Rabbi Yochanan holds that any type of contract like this, where the witnesses are on the same line, the certification has to be on the witnesses that were on the same line. You can't rely on those witnesses underneath. So essentially, here's Rabbi Yochanan's point. If I leave this scribble, where the scribble is, if I leave that blank, and I then tear off this top part, and all I've got is this one line, there's no way for me to write a shtar mezuyah. I can't. Because even if I write a one-line, first, no other rabbis allowed the one-line contract business. So they don't have to worry about it. But even according to Yochanan, who allows you to write a one-line contract, he says, number one, if you write a one-line contract, you can't use the eidim that are below it. So you'll write a one-line contract and put eidim at the end of it, but those will be false witnesses, and then you'll use these two witnesses. That doesn't work either. If you write a one-line contract, you've got to use the witnesses that are on the same line, so these witnesses will never help you anyway. So therefore, this is not a possible one-line situation. Even according to Yochanan, is not a circumstance where you can invalidate the contract. Okay? On the other hand, just to review what Rabbi Yochanan says, this circumstance, where's my my scribbles? But if I had the asharts on the bottom, I can't even leave one line. Why? Because then he could write the one line thing, and then he could put false witnesses at the end of that, and then people will take a look and go, "Oh, look, based on certification, I don't have to look at those witnesses. We can presume they're already certified." That's why he says you can't even leave one line between the witnesses and the certification, because then you could use it and forge it. So again, Rav says, though, that it's the space problem is only a space between the writing and the witnesses. Once you get to the witnesses and the section below, that you don't have to worry about, because they'll fill in the space with scribble. We don't have to worry about them erasing the scribble, because even if you erase the scribble, we're going to look for witnesses. We're not going to look for a certification of basement. So that's not going to be acceptable. Good?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Kufa. Back to some of the same stuff we were talking about in a little bit greater detail. Amar Rav. Rav says, Shtara bahu ve'edav al hamachak kosher. Okay? Let's say we've got a contract and the whole thing was on an erased piece of paper, right? We've got a piece of paper that was erased. The writing was erased. The area where the witness was written on is erased. The whole thing is a smudge, but now you've got a new contract written on top. That is kosher. Now, Ve'im tomar muchak ve'chozer umuchak. So if that's true and you're going to allow me to use a erased contract, how do I know that he's not going to have a contract that was erased and then have it all signed and have witnesses on it, and then he'll erase it again and write it another time?
Wait, say it again. Say it again.
He's got a contract, right? And you can't use it, obviously, if you've got a clean contract and I erase it, I'll see that, right? So that I can't get away with.
Right.
But what if I have the entire contract was an erased contract, okay? Then I certify, I got witnesses, and that's kosher now. Then he goes back and erases the top part of the contract again. And he writes a new thing, right? Instead of $1,000, it was $1 million.
Right.
And he leaves the item below.
Right.
The whole thing was an erased contract, still an erased contract.
Wow.
Says the Gemara, you know why he won't get away with that? Because he says, Eino doma nimchak kamachas v'nimchak shtei pamim. It's still, you could tell the difference between a document that's been erased once and one that's erased twice. He won't get away with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that, okay. V'leichosh dilma shadi diyuta amakom edem meikara. So, you know what maybe he did? He was clever. He scribbled on the bottom of this paper, and then he erased it. Then he had a clean piece of paper on top, and he had erased witness, and then he had witnesses on the bottom. Okay, they sign on the bottom. Now the witness, and then he writes the part on the top. Then he goes and erases the top. Now, but the question is, when we're looking at it, how do you know how do you know? Because at the end of the day, the entire thing has been erased, top and bottom, same number of times.
Why would he even sign on scribble on the bottom?
Okay, fair enough. So here's the answer to that. What he does is, he could even do it like this. The entire thing was erased once. He scribbles a second time on the bottom, and he erases that a second time. Now the witnesses sign on the bottom with an extra bit, on that, and then when he erases the top a second time, the whole thing will look consistent, like it was erased twice.
Right.
Okay. Cool. So we're going to be concerned, right, that maybe Dilma Shadi Diusa Amakomedim, he put some ink, he just threw some ink onto the bottom where the witnesses were, and then made kara before anybody signed anything, umachikle, and then he erases that. Now he presents this document to everybody to write. Okay? So they write a contract, the top part is clean, the bottom part is already messy. They sign right on it. Now, Hadar machikle lahai, so now he then erases the top. The top has been erased once, the bottom's been erased once. He's got kosher witnesses on the bottom. Or at least in this actually, the circumstances, he actually is erasing the top the second time, right? So now he's got it doubly erased. So Amar Abaye says, Kosover Rav holds, and this is what Yehuda was, I think, was saying, witnesses should never sign on anything that is erased unless they watch the guy erase it right in front of them, right? Because you don't want them being tricked, right? So they would not sign anything. So therefore, if a witness sees a erased document, they're going to go, "What's going on here? This is funny. I'm not signing it." Only if they see, okay, well, there was a whole contract here with the contract and witnesses, and then they erased the entire thing, then they'd sign it. Okay?
No, but we're talking about after the fact. You're talking about a based in only?
No, we're talking about when they're actually writing the contract.
Right, but once you have the whole thing is once you have the signature of the agent, why can't you go back?
Well, we're saying that the witnesses in the first place wouldn't fall for this.
Right.
This looks really weird. You just showed up with here, sign right here on the front on the erased part.
Right.
That's a little bit wacky. I'm not falling for that, right? Right? Even the witnesses wouldn't fall for that stuff. Okay. Base space. They come and ask it. Hu al aniyar ve'edav al machak kosher. Let's say I have a contract. Okay. According to this brisa, right? It's not like what we just said. If the contract is written on the clear parts, clean paper, and the witnesses are on the erased parts, kosher. It's that we should be worried, according to what we just said, we should be worried because he'll erase the top part and then he'll have an erased part and an erased part and he can rewrite the top. So now this is our question. The question's being asked. We'll see what the answer is. V'neichush, let's worry about Dilma Machik Le, because of mind body. He'll erase the top and then he'll have an erased top and an erased bottom and he can write whatever he wants. The entire contract will be consistent on erased parchment. So the answer is, in order for this to be valid, the witnesses have to write, so he says what they have to do is the witness have to say, we are hereby signing on smudged parchment while the top was clean. Okay? That way, if they ever come to Beis Din and they see the top is smudged and the bottom is smudged, Beis Din is going to say something wacky is going on. Right. So therefore, the only time that it would be, right, if the witnesses see something funny, they should just record that in their document and then that'll protect everybody from problems. So now, Diksivi Heicha. So where do they write this? Where are they going to write this statement? Milatachas, if they write it under their signatures, so guy is like, he'll just tear that part off. The guy who owns the star isn't going to keep it, he'll just tear it off. Eloi, if it's above, machikli, he'll just erase it with everything else. How does that help that they wrote it? Right. He's busy erasing contracts, so he'll erase that part too. So the answer is, what happened is, they wrote that note between the two witnesses' signatures.
Oh, wow.
Clever, right? They wrote it in between the two signatures. Iachi. So therefore, what's going to happen is it looked really weird, right? All of a sudden, there's more erased in between the two signatures. So that would be weird. So Iachi, if that's true. So now, Ema Sefer, let's look at the end of that brisa. Has a different case. Hu al hamachak. Let's say he writes the contract on erased parchment. The edav ala niyar, and the witnesses sign on the clean, unused part of the parchment. So puzzle. It's going to be puzzle. Amai puzzle. Why should it be puzzle? Hachinami nichtivu hachi anachnu sadi chasamnam niyarosh taramachaka. So he says, why should that be a problem? Why don't you simply have the witnesses write?
No, there's more.
Why not?
Because you could erase it again and be like, as the witness stated, it was already clean.
That's exactly right. Because what will happen is the witnesses are signing on a clean part, but the top was erased. So they'll keep that and they'll just erase it. Go, look, exactly what the witnesses wrote. It's only erased part. Therefore, when I re-erased it a second time. So Hashanami, Mayamar, we're going to say, Mochek, Choser Mochek. So he says, what are you going to, but wait, here's a problem. What are you going to say? You're going to say like Brian says, you're going to say that I'm going to go and erase it a second time? Ha'amart eno doma nimchak pamachas lenimchak shtei pamim. But the top of the page we already said
Right.
that everybody would know the difference anyway. It doesn't say that this parchment was erased twice. It only says it was erased once.
Right.
So if he erases it twice, it'll be noticeable.
Right.
The answer is Hani mili hecha dechasimi sadi amachaka hecha delo chasimi sadi amachaka ella aniyara. So he says you can only tell the difference in a circumstance where you've got erased next to non-erased.
Right.
So then, then I can compare. I've got an erased section and a section erased twice on the same piece of paper. That I can see the difference.
Yeah.
But if I'm looking at just the piece of paper by itself, I can't look at this paper and see how many times it's been erased.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be. It's only by comparison that I can tell that it's been
The
erased.
the witness area wasn't erased, so you could make a comparison.
But then I'm comparing it to not erased at all. That still doesn't help me.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So therefore he says, "Belesu megilta achrisi." So I got a solution. Go get another piece of parchment, right? Velimchok, and erase it. Velidmi, and compare it. Right? Simple, straightforward solution. So the answer is you can't do that either because lo dami machka daha megilsa lemachka daha megilsa. You can't compare. Every piece of parchment looks different when we erase it. You can only compare within the same piece of parchment.
Right.
Okay, so fine. We've got a solution for this too. The witnesses underneath are on a clean piece of paper, right?
Right.
Vilakabla lechasimos yad desadi bebeidina. Have Beis Din certify the signatures. Okay. Now the signatures are certified. We don't need them anymore. Beis Din already certified them. Now the limchok. So erase now the signatures on the same piece of parchment. Those signatures are being erased for the first time.
Right.
Now I have a piece of the parchment. Now I can compare.
Right.
Okay. Validni and compare it. Amar Rav Oshaya. Rav Oshaya says, "Eino doma nimchak bo ben yomo lenimchak ben shnei yom." He says even that you can't do because the parchment changes color after the amount of time that it has been erased. So if Beis Din comes along right now and erases this right now, it's still not going to look the same as the top, which got erased a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So it's not. Things dry. Yeah, things dry. It's not. That's correct. Exactly. It changes color over time.
We're only talking about a contract, not the one that we sold. Remember we said
this is we're talking about the shtar. This is all of these because we're talking about leaving spaces.
Right.
Remember that the shtar kosher that we had, we were signing on the back anyway. So these are not the same issues. Right. Okay. Vilishaye. So let's let the contract sit for a while. We'll let it sit, turn brown, let it age. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Chashinan leBeis Din Toim. We're worried the Beis Din is going to make a mistake. Now, Farshim explain. 1 second. We've gone through pages and pages of detailed instructions for Beis Din. 2 lines, 1 line, scribbles, non-scribbles, right? At this point, there's a lot of confusion, right? What you can get away with, what you can't get away with. All of a sudden, right here, right now, comparing the parchment's erasure, that's where we're going to get the Beis Din confused? Answers the Rashbam. He says, when it comes to a matter of halacha, Beis Din will be able to take care of that. When it comes to the process of comparing, Beis Din's not a science experiment, right? They're not here to say, let's do the physical side, let's scratch off this, compare parchments, this one, that one. That's not where Beis Din is going to. Another explanation is Beis Din's not interested in spending multiple days sitting here identifying a contract.
Right.
That's not how Beis Din. So therefore, that's not going to be, there's no way to be able to, that's why the shtar is puzzle. We're just going to say, this shtar is invalid. We're not going to, you're right, maybe there's a way for us to come up with a way to be able to compare it. Not worth it. Not happening. Beis Din will make a mistake. It's going to be on multiple days. Just puzzle. Okay? So if you've got the contract where the witnesses are signed on plain on the bottom and on top, you can't even write in there that the top was signed because we don't know that he'll erase the top part and rewrite it. Because you're right, even if you could figure out a way to be able to compare and know whether it was erased once or erased twice, just don't get into that. The shtar's puzzle, as you would have said from the beginning, I'm not going to like it. Done. Finished. Okay?
Beautiful.
It is 9.